Good evening, everybody. Hope you had a wonderful week. It's been a good celebratory period during this past week as Springboks won the Rugby World Cup. All right. But let's continue with our Python fundamentals, right? And today we'll be talking about sequence types. Well, we'll be talking about a couple of sequence types, but we'll be talking about sequence types in general, and then we'll dive in or narrow it into two of them. And we're also going to talk about the concepts of mutability. All right. So the learning objectives for today, as usual, we're going to learn how to read, comprehend, adapt, trace, create Python programs that use sequence types, right? We used a sequence type in the previous video. We used the list, and I showed you how to use the list, the use case of it when you want to store a collection of items. We've used this to iterate. We've used this to show how we use the for loops and loop structures like the while to iterate through elements within the list, all right? But we're going to discuss other sequence types. And then we're going to talk about the concept of mutability. And if we just reason it out from English, to mutate is to change your state, right? So the ability for an object or in Python to be able to change its state. We're going to talk about that. And then we're going to talk about tuples, which is a sequence type in Python. And then we're going to round off with the dictionary, okay? So what is the sequence, right? So now we have, what is the sequence type? So as you see at the bottom of the screen there, you have, let's call it like a collection of items. You have the days of the week, excluding the weekend. And as you can see, there's an index value from 0 to 4. And for each index, there's a value, which is the day of the week. And as you can see with the quotation marks, those are strings. So essentially a sequence type, right? A sequence, let me not say a sequence type. A sequence is a positionally ordered collection of items, right? And an item in a sequence is referenced by using its index number, right? So like I said, it's a positionally ordered collection of items. Therefore, it can store more than one element, and it can also be empty. You'll see that you actually use that a lot, right? You initialize an empty list or an empty sequence type, and then do something to it along the way as you're doing an iteration, right? So in Python, this index starts at 0, not 1. As you can see below there, the index is starting at 0. The first element is 0. The second element is 1. And if it has n elements, the last element is the number of items minus 1. So we have 5 items here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we minus 1, we have the final index, which is 4, right? So that is how you index items in a list, or the notation or convention or calculation on how to calculate the index of sequences in a list. Excuse the typo that I see of, but anyway, let's continue. So mutable and immutable. So Python has the following built-in sequence types, which can be mutable and some can be immutable. We're going to discuss that. Elements can be iterated over by element. Remember, we've done that with the list where we were iterating through the elements and checking what was in it, or if we wanted to sum the collection of items in a list. All right, so that what it means. Elements can be iterated over and over again, and then mutable and immutable. So a mutable object is one that can change its state, and immutable one that cannot, right? So we have several sequence types in Python. You have lists, you have byte arrays, you have tuples, you have strings, you have range, and you have bytes. Strings are also a list, not a list, but a collection, a sequence type. It's a collection of characters, and you also have bytes, right? So Python elements classify sequence types as mutable and immutable, as I discussed, and then I will show you in the next slide which ones are mutable and immutable. So mutability is the property of any data or data literal. Remember, we spoke about data literals not too long ago, that describes its ability to be changed during program execution. So in the blurry image that you see here, I didn't scale it properly, but mutable objects in Python and immutable objects in Python. So the lists, some of them you haven't been introduced to, but some of them you have. But so on the left-hand side, we have mutable objects. We have the list. Remember, we could access items, we could delete items, we could add items, we could edit items in the list, right? So you have a dictionary. We're going to get to that soon, 2 slides from now. And you have a set, and you have a byte array. And then you have immutable objects with the number types are immutable, a string is immutable, a tuple is immutable, and another version of the set is the frozen set. And since it's frozen, I guess it means it's not immutable. You can't change a bool statement or bytes or Unicode, right? So those are some of the immutable and mutable objects in Python, right? So now Python's data model, right? Objects are Python's abstraction for data. And I'm saying abstraction right now, but later on, we're going to talk about OOP, right? And that is a very important concept that we'll discuss, but let's carry along. Data in Python is represented as an object or by relations between objects, right? So every object in Python has an identity, right? A type and a value. So when you create it, it has an ID, and the ID never changes once created in Python. So remember an object's type, right? Remember when we're using that function type and we put the variable that we stored and we would get the type of that object that's stored in the variable. So the data type determines like the operations that the object can do, right? Remember when we're calculating, when we're doing the program where the person had to input the cost of the trip, and then we try to put in a string. We put in an int, but if we put it, we had to convert it from a string to an int, because we know we can't add strings together the way we want it to be. So that is what they mean, like the operations are determined by the data type, and it also defines the possible range of values of that type. Now remember the type function I just said, like the identity, the type of an object cannot be changed. However, the value of some objects can be changed. And remember, lo and behold, the ones that can be changed are called mutable, and the ones whose values cannot be changed is immutable. So an object's mutability is determined by its type. For instance, numbers and strings, tuples are immutable. If you see, look on the right there, while dictionaries and lists are mutable, okay? So now we get to tuples, right? So a tuple in Python is essentially similar to a list. The only difference is one is mutable and the other is immutable. So the tuple is the immutable one. We cannot change the elements of a tuple once it is assigned, whereas we can change the elements of a list, right? So, however, a tuple like is created by placing elements inside parentheses. Remember, the list was square brackets. Here we have parentheses. And another way of defining a tuple, you can the elements are separated by commas, just like in the list, but this one's covered by parentheses. However, the parentheses are optional, right? And you can initialize or instantiate a tuple without the parentheses. You just need to separate the values with a comma. Now, behaves like a list, but cannot be modified in situ. So in situ, in situation, in place, right? So that's a bit of Latin there. So it's just immutable. You can't just say, okay, I want to access element 0 and change the value from 12 to 100. You can't do that with a tuple, right? So like I said, we can create them with or without tuples. And I show you an example of that there. It's good practice though to use the parentheses, right? And now the last one is the dictionary, right? And a dictionary is a mapping type in Python, right? The mappings represent a finite set of objects indexed by arbitrary index sets, right? So the keys have to be, so we have key value pairs. The keys cannot be mutable. They have to be immutable objects. So they can't be lists or dictionaries or any other mutable type. So you can't do that. Any type that is compared by value rather than the object's identity cannot be a key in a dictionary, right? So this because it works in a type of hash map, right? That creates a key. You create a hash for the key, and that has to remain constant, right? Unless you change the value, right? So keys have to be unique. So keys cannot be mutable, like I've said, but however, the dictionary itself can be mutable. I can access a key and change the value that was stored in there. So that is how you define a dictionary in Python. We will go to Visual Studio Code and then do some more hands-on coding with tuples and dictionaries. Okay. So key takeaways. The tuples are ordered and immutable collections of data. It's a sequence type, but this one is immutable. Tuples can store elements of different types, just like a list, and the elements are accessed using index, and the dictionary is mutable and index collection of data. Remember, the keys, however, cannot be mutable. They have to be immutable, and dictionaries is essentially a set of key value pairs. Alrighty, thank you guys. We will see you on the flip side. See you at Visual Studio Code. Thanks for joining. Cheers.